How's it going, guys? So I just got finished playing Shovel Knight for the first time just a few days ago at the time of making this video, and it's left a pretty great impression on me. This is a very talked about game. A lot of people love it. I see like polls for like the greatest game of the 2010s over on Game FAQs, and this game is simply cleaning up over there. So this is one game. This is an indie game that has driven people wild, and it's also brought back the old school era of gaming into the modern era, something that I absolutely love. I love when developers and game makers do that. So guys, without further ado, let's have a little review of Shovel Knight. Hope you guys all enjoy this one. So we start off the game and we're introduced to the story, and it's pretty basic. Shovel Knight, the protagonist, loses their beloved Shield Knight, which I accidentally chose the body swap feature at the beginning, not really realizing what that was, and it changes the gender of the character. So it ended up that Shield Knight was my boyfriend instead of my girlfriend, but depending on what you choose to play as, you know, that's Shield Knight will act accordingly. So you put yourself into self-exile, you're alone, and meanwhile, you know, while you're away, you're a protector of the land, you're not able to protect the land anymore, and the Order of No Quarter and the Enchantress takes over the land, and now it's time for you to make your return and save the day and stop the Enchantress from taking over the land. So you're going to have to battle through 8 knights of the Order of No Quarter, and these characters have a lot of flavor to them, and you're going to get to know them through their boss battles, and they like their designs a lot. And these bosses have a lot of personality, especially in their designs. You've got a plague doctor called Plague Knight. You've got a deep sea underwater treasure hunter in a deep diving suit known as Treasure Knight. You've got another boss called Propeller Knight, who wears a propeller and flies around with it on top of his helmet. There's another one with a welder's mask. And then after you beat him, he then jumps into a giant mech suit. You've even got a freaking Viking that uses a snow shovel. There's a lot of creativity going on here, a lot of personality, and you're going to see throughout your adventure there's a whole lot of charm. And that's exactly one of the greatest points that Shovel Knight excels at. It's its charm, and we all know as gamers about charm and how certain games have charmed their way into our hearts. They usually end up being some of the greatest games of all time, and I feel that Shovel Knight is no different. Well, speaking of the bosses, let's talk a little bit about the levels that they inhabit. And these are really well-designed levels. I love all the different challenges and gimmicks that you see as you go through them. They're very Mega Man design. This game reminds me a lot of Mega Man and a lot of the challenge. I will say, though, I think that Shovel Knight, notorious for its difficulty, and you're going to die a lot in these levels because there's a lot of challenges and you're not going to know what to expect, a lot like the Mega Man series. But I will say this, I do find this game a little bit more forgiving. I think a lot of things you get a little bit more visual clues, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact of when Shovel Knight came out. You know, no longer bound by certain archaic design decisions. There are more visual clues. I feel like I'm better prepared for the journey ahead. You know, a lot of times with Mega Man, you're like, what just happened there? And you just suddenly die. It's easier to adjust to a lot of these gimmicks. I seem to really understand. They kind of give you a bit of a chance to test them out. It doesn't feel as trial and error-y as a lot of the Mega Man games. That's no knock against Mega Man. That's a classic series. But I feel like there's certain things that Shovel Knight does to introduce you to the level design and the gimmicks contained within, and that's what makes it such a great game. I never really felt like smashing my controller, or throwing my Switch across the room in furious anger. I really enjoyed the challenge, I appreciated the challenge, and I always felt like if I died, it was my fault and not the game's, because I just wasn't skilled enough to go into that challenge. I felt like I had to practice it a few more times. And there are checkpoints, which is great. There's no more starting from the beginning of a level. Of course, there were checkpoints in Mega Man as well, of course, but they're more plentiful here. Now, granted, these levels are longer, a lot longer. But I don't know, I just felt like they were a lot more fair than when I experienced in Mega Man. Mega Man has a lot of really frustrating rage moments, in my opinion anyway, and I didn't really feel that so much with Shovel Knight. I felt like it was pretty fair, and I think a lot of people complaining about the difficulty kind of just overstating that point. I think these are people that weren't used to the NES days of hard, and even the SNES days of super hard games that were unforgiving and sometimes didn't even give you checkpoints. And the other thing is there's no lives. You have these checkpoints, and you can even choose not to use the checkpoints. You could actually break these open and get a diamond instead. And that's one of the other fun things about this game is the currency. There is monetary rewards all over the land, and I love like the feeling you get when you find a chest and you open it up, and the little animation of Shovel Knight digging through the chest as all the glorious gems and diamonds go all over the place. And you could use this. And you can use this money to purchase upgrades for yourself, for your armor, for your shovel. I don't think there's nearly enough upgrades for the shovel, to be quite honest. As well as your health and magic. Now, a lot of the upgrade armors are very strange. They kind of have a check and balance system, where you kind of have to give up a certain attribute for another, and I didn't really like that. I kind of went with this one, the one that allows you to lose less gems when you die. And that's a very interesting mechanic. Instead of having lives, you lose money as a punishment for dying. And but you could get it back as long as you can make it back to the spot that you were at when you did die. If you don't, that money is gone forever. So it is pretty frustrating when you lose quite a bit of dough. But it's not as rage-filling as when you have to start from the beginning of a level. And I like that give and take that they did. I think that's a pretty fair trade-off. You want to have a little bit of the old school, but you don't want to give people those rage-filled, console smashing rage bouts that people would have in the past due to these overly difficult, unforgiving games. It kind of is a little bit of a reminder, but saying like, okay, we're not going to go that far. And I really appreciate that with Shovel Knight. It was a very fair difficulty curve. They start you off pretty easy. There's little hints that there's going to be some challenges ahead. Let's talk a little bit about Shovel Knight's moveset and what he brings to the table in terms of combat and progressing through the levels. So, of course, the shovel is the main weapon, and you'll notice that this is very similar to DuckTales, as you can use the shovel to bounce, just like Scrooge McDuck's cane could, and you could bounce off of enemies to reach higher platforms, and you could also bounce off of certain stage gimmicks. And I really like that you kind of remember older games as you're going through this, but you appreciate all the new mechanics and the different ways that they manage to work it into the level design. Everything flows very nicely, and you're always having a good time. You know, I didn't really come across anything that was overly frustrating. A lot of the mechanics, they just work. They feel right. They feel good, and I know every single moment I was going through these stages, everything was enjoyable. I liked a lot of the backgrounds. Plague Knight stage, you know, I liked looking at all the beakers and all the different tubes in the background. It really fit Plague Knight's character, you know, sort of a mad scientist, you know. And it's really fitting because later on those beakers come into play during your battle with Plague Knight, and they're exploding in your face as he's throwing those fireballs at you. And then you've got the this airship stage, and then you come across Propeller Knight, and you know, it just fits the stage oh so well. You know, there's nothing better than going through a stage and then coming across a boss that like just kind of puts the cherry on top of the ice cream sundae, which are these luscious stages. I mean, they're just great. It's so much fun to progress through. I want to talk about a few notable upgrades as well, like the phase amulet. I thought was really cool and probably one of the most useful things in the game. You know, you can throw fireballs, but I'll be honest, I sometimes forgot about that because you have to switch the amulets. And sometimes when you have to switch weapons and it's not mandatory, I'm going to kind of forget about those things, especially if I really like one particular item. And though it might not be a weapon, it is a defensive item, and it allows you to be invincible for 2 seconds. And this is very useful during boss fights. You know, if you didn't have this amulet, it would definitely make fights like Plague Knight, where he's like throwing a bunch of crap at you, you know, a lot more difficult. But this kind of eases up on the difficulty. So I feel like if you want to make this game even more challenging, don't use it. But it's definitely a lot more useful than a lot of the other items in the game. So, and you get it very early on. So that was great. And it's a way of showing you like, okay, you know, you could use this. But maybe if you don't use it, it could, you know, you'll have a harder time. It kind of depends. So you could kind of set your own challenge, which I really like. There's a lot of different options, you know. A lot of these items are optional, which was really cool. So if you don't like one, you could stick with another. Also, you have plenty of opportunities to upgrade your magic and purchase meal tickets, which you could turn into hearts. And, you know, the game gives you quite a bit of health, you know, and quite a bit of magic. And you'll gain more and more as you go on, which makes some parts of these levels a lot easier. Because even though they progress in challenge in some ways, sometimes you'll feel like a certain level may be easier than a previous one, but you know, I don't think that's any fault of the game or a knock against the difficulty curve. It's just maybe personal taste. That's how it is sometimes. Certain gimmicks may give certain people certain trouble, while other people might find it simple. Just like games themselves, it's all up to the individual playing them. But I felt like I had plenty of health. There were plenty of opportunities for health drops as well. Now, I did die quite a bit, that's for sure, but I never, like I said before, I never was raging and angry at the game. I always felt like I had enough at hand to help me. There's the phase amulet. You know, I could use these anchors here, which you could use to hit enemies. Is especially useful like in this part here where you've got some climbing enemies and they're a little bit out of range. So there's a lot of different tools to deal with different situations, and if you think it out, a lot of times things are not as difficult. So before you decide to pass up this game because of its notorious reputation for being overly difficult, I'm here to say that it's not as difficult as some other indie games out there and other video games. I think it's very forgiving. It's very enjoyable. It's a great journey. And of course, we have to talk about that music. Of course, we have to talk about it. I mean, this is just one of the best gaming soundtracks I've heard in years. Let's have a little listen to some of my favorite tracks. We've got to talk about the Iron Whale stage. which is Treasure Knight's stage. I like the music on this stage because it's both menacing and beautiful. You know, you're kind of cruising along in a submarine underneath the water, you know, and you've kind of got this very serene piece, but, you know, you hear there's a bit of menace to it. I really like that. So give a listen here and see what you think, because I think this is an outstanding track. And if you haven't already noticed, you notice it sounds a lot like Mega Man there. Such a great track. Naomi Matsuda from Mega Man, the first Mega Man game, that was the composer. She worked with Jake Kaufman, who also composed the music for the Shantae series. They worked together on that amazing track. And there is another track that you guys have to hear, and that is the one for the Plague Knight stage. This definitely has an amazing vibe to it that matches the level tenfold. It has a very wild and frenetic sound to it that matches the character of Plague Knight and the crazy level design. It sounds so great. It works so well. Guys, have a listen to that one as well. So you could just tell this is a classic soundtrack, and I fell in love with it. A lot of these indie games, Celeste and Shantae, just have such ambitious developers and composers that want to make these games stand out. So I know they try extra hard, and it works. It definitely works, and it's working for Shovel Knight. You know, this soundtrack, the design, everything just comes together in one complete package, and it's great. So guys, that just about does it for this video. I hope you guys consider playing Shovel Knight. If you haven't already, you probably have. I think just about everyone has except for me. So I want to thank you guys for watching this video. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the bell so you get all the notifications when I post all my new videos. I want to thank all my patrons, and guys, I'll see you next time.